Welcome to Let's Eat. I'm your host, Emily, holistic health coach and self-proclaimed wellness enthusiast, here to meet you at the intersection of physical and mental health, the exact location where optimal wellness lies. This podcast is meant to explore all areas of mind and body wellness, designed to offer you the integrative knowledge, behavioral strategies, and mindset shifts necessary to uplevel your health and feel better today. We'll explore nutrition, sleep, movement, self-care and stress management, habits and routines, gut health, mental health, and more. I am so happy that you're here. Welcome to the table. Let's eat. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Let's Eat. Today's episode is... I've just spent the last hour, maybe even the last 24 hours, reflecting on how I want to approach this topic. And I feel like I'll give you this as a background as we move into it. I think first and foremost, it is a cumbersome topic. It's multifaceted. In some cases, it's over my head, right? In terms of, the specifics of it. And it is, I guess, kind of controversial, right? To talk about the pharmaceutical industry, the food industry. I think with this topic comes a lot of conspiracy energy. And so I want to be sure that I kind of take note of all of these things as I explore this topic. But really, this episode is meant to be a conversation, or I guess a dialogue. I know that there's no one else with me here, but really just kind of me talking about my thoughts on this topic in a more open-ended, kind of free-flowing way, because I really think that it needs to be talked about, and I feel very strongly about this. If you follow me on Instagram, I guess it was maybe last week or 2 weeks ago, I spent some time talking about this because there was a recent article that came out, and I'll share on that as we get into the episode. But it just feels like a lot, and I had just kind of questioned, do I even want to record this right now? Because I feel like I don't even know where to begin, but I guess I'm just going to start and talk about the concept in and of itself and kind of my thoughts on it, and then give you tangible action steps to better navigate the reality that is our food industry and our country as it relates to this topic. Because ultimately, I think that's the best thing that I can do, and that's what I feel called to do, is to just share a little bit about what's going on. And you can take it or leave it, right? I think it's a little bit outrageous to some extent, and I think it needs to be talked about. But I think there is going to be some disbelief around it, right? And I think that's where that conspiracy energy comes in. But I encourage you to come into this episode with an open mind and be willing to just listen, to, reflect, to let it kind of digest for you. And then, proceed as it relates to your health and your nutritional choices and so forth in whatever way you feel called to proceed. I also want to share that there are a couple individuals that I want you to refer to if you're interested in learning more on a deeper level about this topic. So I will put their information in the show notes, but that is Casey and Callie Means. I love Dr. Casey Means. She wrote a book that I wish I could reread again for the first time because it's such a good book, and I plowed through it in probably like 3 days because it was so important and so informative and so rich in information. And she actually, within the last 4 months since her book released in May, has been on fire through podcasting and speaking, engagements and social media and so forth on this topic. And so I'm really grateful for that because I think it's shedding light on a larger scale around what's going on. So I'll share a few resources in the show notes, but Casey and Callie Means, great resources. Dr. Mark Hyman, he's a really great resource. He wrote a book called Food Fix, and I actually read this, say a couple years ago, maybe 2020. I don't remember exactly when. But that's a really great book to learn a little bit more about the reality of our food supply and our food system. And he talks a little bit more about regenerative agriculture and sustainability. And, he dives into maybe more of the political side of things as well. So does Casey and Kelly Means, but he does a really great job at articulating, and he's been such an advocate for this. He's all over it when it comes to these topics and endorsing them and fighting for them. And, it's really, really incredible what he is doing, what others are doing. So let's get into it. Let's dive in and let's just talk about it, because it needs to be talked about. And I think this is the best avenue, the best platform in order to do it. And I think, this is something that, while it feels a little bit daunting maybe, and a little bit tricky to navigate, I just want to put my thoughts out there, and I'd be curious to hear your feedback on them. So please feel free to leave some comments on this episode or DM me if you feel more comfortable with that. But let's dive in. Let's talk about the food industry. Let's talk about the pharmaceutical industry. Let's talk about what in the world is going on here. So I feel like I bring a very unique perspective to this topic, and that is because I'm coming from a couple different angles. So obviously, my belief system, and that is very much centered on nutrition and lifestyle as being primary players in how we feel and prevention of disease and so forth. This is a very integrative, very holistic-minded approach to health. Now, this was not always the case for me, right? I didn't grow up in an environment that fostered this belief system. Not even until probably my early 20s did I actually really fully conceptualize this, and then decided to start to take my health into my own hands, and have now obviously gotten to where I am today. What I do with clients, what I promote on social media, what I talk about on the podcast is very much rooted in mind-body healing and, how we feel being a direct reflection of how it is that we take care of ourselves or we don't take care of ourselves. I will say, though, to that point, alongside that, I also am very much a big believer in pharmaceuticals and the need for our medical system. I grew up with a brother who has been sick his entire life. He's a year older than I, and he has been in and out of the hospital. He's been to dozens of specialists. He's seen countless doctor's visits and has been on medication since he was a year and a half. And his health history is beyond complex and continues to, be a big part of his life. And I know that he would not be here today if we did not have the healthcare that we have. And so I really want to be sure that I share that, not because I'm looking for any kind of sympathy or for him or anything like that, but just so that everyone's aware, I want to be as neutral in this conversation as possible because I don't want to be insensitive. I know that our healthcare system has helped me in a number of ways, has helped my siblings, my family members, and so forth, and friends and a number of individuals that are near and dear to me. I know that they have benefited from medication at one point or whatever the case is, right? So this is really important to me because I don't want to come across as anti-medication or anti-pharmaceuticals or anti-doctors or anything of that nature, because that's simply not the case. And I just really hope that I can provide, like I said, a more well-rounded perspective on this, because I come from both camps to some extent, right? Where this is our healthcare system and I respect it. I respect doctors. I respect the work that they do. It's work that not many people could do, right? And so I acknowledge that, and I know that that is the case. And also, right, this is a dialectic where two opposites can exist at the same time. I believe that much of our health can be taken into our own hands, and we can take responsibility and authority in our own health journeys much more than maybe we previously have been led to believe. So both can exist, right? I can believe both at the same time, and I can see both of those perspectives very clearly. And so I hope that as you navigate and listen to this episode, you consider that I'm coming from both of those angles for this topic, and that you too can have multiple different opinions and perspectives on this topic, right? That it doesn't have to be one or the other, that you can come at it from a multitude of different angles based on your experience, based on your beliefs. I think we're a very divided country in a number of ways, and we're expected to be one or the other. And I'm not meaning this politically. I'm just saying in general, it's like always black and white, but I think there can be a lot of gray area in all of this. So I want to be sure that that is made clear. But what I do believe is going on with our healthcare alongside our food industry, this is problematic. And this is what I want to shed light on, right? This is what I want to talk about, is why it's problematic, what exactly is going on, and then what we can do to take care of ourselves in the midst of all of it. So I think an overwhelming theme that I just want to share, and this I think is really embedded in just our culture, is so much of what we do and what we've normalized is not health focused. And this goes far beyond food. This isn't just about food. This is about our lack of movement and how common it is to be sedentary. And this goes all the way back to what type of job you work. Do you sit at a desk? Are you active, right, during the workday? This speaks to sleep quality and how our culture has really dismissed the need for quality sleep, or we've normalized maybe this sleep when we're dead mentality and this toxic hustle culture mentality, instead of really emphasizing and creating space for the importance of sleep. We have become addicted to our cell phones and technology and the blue light exposure, what that's doing to our quality of sleep and our hormones and so forth. We use an abundance of chemicals and toxins on a daily basis, and we've just normalized that, right? That's just part of, a medicine cabinet, or that's part of underneath the kitchen sink. That's just the repertoire of cleaning products that one might have. And I want to really, also acknowledge the fact that it might not be another 5, 10, 15, 20 years for research to reflect the impact that these components are actually having on our health, right? And that's really important, because it's not commonplace for us to be cautious of toxins. It's not commonplace for us to see that our 9 to 5 sitting at a desk is actually harmful to our health. It's not commonplace for us to acknowledge these things because it's not part of our culture, because the norm is sitting at a desk from 9 to 5, right? Our norm is using Clorox to clean the toilets, right? Our norm is to grab McDonald's on the ride home because it's easier to go through drive-through and there's a McDonald's at every stoplight, right? These are all norms. And I think that we have to bring this on a level where we recognize that just because it's common doesn't make it normal. And I know I use this phrase a lot when it comes to symptoms, right? Just because having stomach issues is common doesn't mean it's normal, right? And it's kind of similar here, where we have to be willing to first and foremost adopt a whole new perspective on the way that we have been culturally raised in order for us to then see beyond this point of view, right? This is all about awareness. Awareness is the key to transformation. So if we're actually able to look at the fact that these are behaviors, lifestyle components, realities of our culture, of the vast majority, right? And we also know that these behaviors, these lifestyle practices, these norms are correlated with poorer health outcomes, that's a very tricky place to be, right? It's a very tricky place to be when that is what we've only ever known. And now we have to essentially shapeshift to some extent or completely rewrite the way that we operate as human beings. And then even further, maybe start to re-envision the way that we see health, the way that we see health care. I think the way that it currently stands with our approach and our perspective on health is that it is not my responsibility to take care of myself. I think we have a very narrow view where I need to exercise and eat right in order to maintain a healthy weight. Like, that is the narrow kind of understanding that I would argue, and this, I could be wrong, but this is coming from my experience growing up, where this is kind of the way that I understood it, is eating right, eating healthfully, quote unquote, and moving our body is for the sake of maintaining or losing weight. And it was not often associated. I did not associate what we ate, how we lived our lives, and so forth, and all that comes along with that, with the potential that we could develop disease. And that's a very interesting point of view, right? Because it takes the onus off of us as being even partially responsible for disease. If we don't believe that our nutrition and the way that we live our lives, our light exposure, our gut health, our liver health, our movement, all of these components, right? If we do not believe that we have responsibility in taking care of these areas and prioritizing these areas for the sake of prevention of disease, and instead disease just happens, if you're lucky or unlucky, right? You're healthy or you're not healthy, then of course, we aren't going to take responsibility for our actions in order to take care of ourselves, right? Because if we don't believe that we have a part in that, then of course, why would it matter, right? And that's the issue, is we're not being taught this. We're not being taught that genetics load the gun and environment pulls the trigger, that it's 95% environment and it's only a small percentage of our genetic makeup. And that, if we just sent that message across. Now, there's a lot of factors that I want to consider as I move through this conversation, as to not be insensitive to populations that maybe have limited access, physically cannot access high quality food, economically, financially cannot access high quality food, supplements, and so forth, right? The things that come along with living a more healthful lifestyle. But for the sake of this conversation, I really want to focus on the food. So I always want to be sure I share that, because I never want to come across as insensitive, that there are populations, especially in the world that we live in today, that don't have access to these things. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later on in the episode. However, this is the first place that we need to start. We need to start taking responsibility for our bodies, our brains, our health. And this starts with, what are we doing every single day to preserve our health and to prevent and heal from even disease? If this was something that was taught as general curriculum of all ages, and if we were taught from a young age the value in investing in these areas of our health, think about how much of a difference we would make in the lives of children, adolescents, young adults, just general health, if this was a part of our upbringing, if this was a part of our lives at an early age, or at any point in time. Honestly, I'm grateful that I was able to discover it when I did. But it's just wild to me. And I think this all boils down to the relationship that exists between the food industry and the pharmaceutical industry, right? Because let's say in an idealistic world that we all learned about this at a young age, right? Think about like kindergarten health classes. These kids are being taught how to build a balanced plate, and the cafeteria is filled with nourishing foods, fruits and veggies. And at a young age, these kids are getting exposure to regular movement and getting good quality sleep. And maybe our schedules were more conducive to that, right? Maybe there was more of a boundary around, well, if we want, our kids to get the required amount of sleep, we won't have them, getting up at 7 a.m. to go to class. We'll push it back to 9 a.m. to give them more time to sleep. Now, I know that this is obviously more complex because what we have to consider is, the adult's work schedule and so forth, but we'll just say in an ideal world, right? This would likely eliminate much of the food industry and the food system, right? Because if it's not a real whole food, if it's not a high quality meat or, nuts, seeds, fruits, veggies, whole grains, right? That's only a fraction of what we find in the grocery store. That's actually probably a very small percentage of what we find in the grocery store, and everything else is processed or ultra processed food, right? So if we were to initiate this as part of the education system, then at a young age, students and children and so forth, and parents as a result of that, would learn how important it is for these to be parts of our existence. Now, I understand that it is so much more systemic than that, and it's embedded in literally every single thing that we do, right? Just the busyness, the chaos of life, the convenience factor of fast food. I mean, it's so complex, like I said at the beginning. But if you think about it, right, this would really diffuse the need for us or the interest for us to turn to these ultra-processed foods, because if we're learning at a young age how harmful it is for our health and our wellness, and we're given that information right, straight up, right? Like this is what the research says, that would be enough for, I would argue, a lot of different individuals to make a more healthful choice. But we're not given this information, and instead we are misled with an outdated food pyramid. We are, inundated with marketing of fast food, of sugar, of not only, the food industry, but pharmaceutical industries, right? Every other commercial, it's a fast food commercial, a pharmaceutical commercial. It's a fast food commercial, it's a pharmaceutical commercial. And when you look at it through this lens, when you look at it through the lens that we're talking here, it's almost outrageous. It's not almost outrageous. It is outrageous. You are promoting this fast food, these ultra processed foods, and then in the same breath, in the next 30 seconds, you are then promoting a medication. And that is the epitome of what is going on between the food industry and the pharmaceutical industries. Okay, so back to my original example. If we're taught about the importance of real whole foods, how to build a balanced plate, the correlation between ultra-processed foods and disease, right? And if we're taught this as a commonplace part of our upbringing, of our education, that will immediately, I would say, right? There's almost a guarantee that most of the food industry would cease to exist or it would crumble. Okay, I'm not going to say all of it, but I will say some of it. And with that, okay, if we continue to operate through the belief system that I am sharing here, if that is the case, if we know ultra-processed foods correlate with a higher incidence of obesity, of disease, fill in the blank there, then what does this mean for the pharmaceutical companies? Well, if I am not eating ultra-processed foods, and that lessens my likelihood of obesity, of type 2 diabetes, of heart disease, of Alzheimer's, of disease, fill in the blank, then I don't then subsequently need to be treated for said diseases. So it's a lose-lose for these entities, right? For us as Americans to be healthy. I want to read this quote from Casey Means. You know I love her, and I kind of extracted some of her interviews and from her book to really kind of drive this point home. If you just go on the normal treadmill of just American culture, you will get sick. That's almost a guarantee. If you just do whatever that's in norms, sitting, eating packaged foods, which make up 70% of our calories these days, letting your phone beep in the middle of the night so you're getting poor sleep, you're going to get sick. And so you really have to do something differently these days if you want to escape that. And the beauty is it's fairly simple, but you do have to be vigilant and you have to be aware. So this quote really inspired the conversation starter that I just initiated about how it's a norm that we now have to be aware of. It's not to say that we have to, completely isolate ourselves from it, right? That's impossible. If we live in this country, we have to follow norms, right? There's norms that just exist, and that's just the way it goes. But it does require us to be vigilant, as she says, and to be aware. Because if you continue to operate by the norms that our culture, American culture, has deemed as normal, there is a greater likelihood of illness and disease. I think a better example is to go to any other country. Literally go to any other country and experience those cultures. I remember a client of mine told me that she was in Italy. I guess this was last year, maybe. And she said that she went to a Starbucks, or I forget what country she was in. I think it was Italy. And she just wanted a water, but she wanted to get, I guess it's a Trenta water. There's tall, grande, venti, and Trenta, which is extra large, essentially. And she ordered it, and the barista was like, we don't have that. That's like an American thing. You guys created this. We don't have that. And if that was not the epitome of like the supersize me of McDonald's, right? Where it's like everything has to be bigger and better, and how much more can I consume and how much sweeter can I make it, right? If that's not the epitome of American culture, I don't know what is, right? The fact that we created an extra large size at Starbucks just because we wanted more of our Frappuccino or pumpkin spice latte or whatever. And other countries are literally like, yeah, we don't do that here, which is just so interesting. But not just that example, just different lifestyle practices and how individuals operate in other cultures. And then looking at our culture and being like, wait a second, we don't do things that way. Or you being in someone else's culture and being like, whoa, this is so different. You don't know until you know, right? You don't know until you know. I use this example a lot, and I think it's a great way to kind of conceptualize this. I grew up in a Christian household. And so up until I understood that there were other religions, that's all I ever knew. Like, that is my norm. That is my religious norm, is that I grew up reading the Bible, believing that there is heaven and God, and that Jesus died on the cross, right? I grew up in that religious belief system. And that was how I was raised. So all of us collectively living in this country, if we were born and raised here, we're going to have a similar experience, but it's not about religion. It's not about sexuality, right? It's about lifestyle norms and nutritional norms. And we have to be aware of them in order to choose otherwise. Okay, so this is first and foremost what I encourage you for, is to be aware. Just be aware, okay? Just be aware. I think something else that needs to be considered here too is the fact that we increasingly spend more on healthcare with every passing year, but we're not getting better. And not only that, we're not getting better, we're just getting sicker. Like, the increase in chronic illness and the epidemics that exist, it's outrageous, okay? I want to pull this quote. The war on obesity is now ramping up, with new research estimating that the global cost will be a crippling $4 trillion by 2035. Health spending in the United States is projected to grow by 5% between 2023 and 2024 to a total of $4.9 trillion. So we just continue to see increases in healthcare costs, and we continue to see increases in disease. It'd be one thing if we saw increase in healthcare costs and then a decrease in disease. And we're like, okay, something's going on here, right? But all we're doing is spending more money on our healthcare. And we're also then seeing an increase in the illnesses that we're suffering from. So what's missing here? What is the problem? I'm going to rattle off some statistics that really beautifully emphasize and unfortunately illustrate the reality of what's going on, and then also the previous point that I just made. So 74% of American adults are either overweight or obese. Close to 40% of children are overweight or obese. 52% of Americans have prediabetes or type 2 diabetes. 30% of teens have prediabetes. This was 11% in 2002. 1 in 36 children are on the autism spectrum, up from 1 in 150 in the year 2000. This number is 1 in 22 in California. 34% of young adults have a mental, emotional, or behavioral disorder. Incidence of early onset cancers have increased by 79% in recent years. Nearly 1 in 2 Americans is predicted to get cancer in their lifetime, 41.6% chance. This is the first year America is estimated to have over 2 million new cases of cancer. Autoimmune diseases are rising rapidly, with some studies showing rates rising 3 to 12% annually. 18% of teens have fatty liver disease. 20 to 25% of women are on an antidepressant medication. Early onset dementia and Alzheimer's disease have tripled since 2013. American girls are starting puberty years earlier than they were in prior centuries and are starting earlier than any other continent in the world. Infertility is rising rapidly and unsustainably, with sperm counts declining 1% per year and infertility rates rising 1% per year. The U.S. has the highest infant and maternal mortality rate of all high-income countries, despite spending the most. Life expectancy is seeing a sustained decline in the United States, driven by COVID, chronic liver disease, heart disease, and suicide. 77% of young Americans are not able to qualify for military service due to health problems or drug use. Now, I think statistics help to really conceptualize things. I know for me, I like to hear these numbers because it helps me really understand the gravity of these issues. But tell me why we're spending so much money and yet these rates continue to increase. And we're noticeably, in years past, there has been significant increase in some of these issues, most of these issues. And now we continue to see them expand and grow and increase. And we continue to pour money into healthcare and so forth, and we're not looking at the fact that what is the foundation upon which we're standing? What is the foundation? And the foundation is all that I just mentioned, right? It's unmanaged stress, it's processed foods, it's poor sleep, it's sedentary living. It's all of these essential aspects of life, of health, that are not being promoted, that are not being recommended. It's just another pill that's being pushed that's not actually getting to the root of the issue. The root of the issue has to do with dysfunction within the body, imbalances within the body, and can be addressed and managed through the use of proper nutrition, through movement, and so forth. And we know this, whether it's something to do with our gut, which we know all disease begins in the gut, which then obviously lends a hand to hormone health. It lends a hand to blood sugar health. It lends a hand to all other areas of our health. Every person's different, but at the end of the day, these foundational pillars of what makes us us, day in and day out, what it is that we're doing or not doing, is going to dictate our health in the immediate term and the long term. But you're never going to find a pharmaceutical company, even maybe not a doctor. Doctors might, depending on how they operate, and I don't want to, generalize here, but they are not trained to offer guidance. They're not trained to endorse these non-negotiable parts of wellness. I think they have 17 hours of nutrition training in their schooling. And most, if not all, of these diseases can be prevented by adequate nutrition. Is that not wild? Is that not wild? That so much of our time is spent looking at how can we treat the symptom? How can we, manage this illness? When you get on these medications, you're on these medications usually for the long term. They're not meant to get to the root. They're not meant to eradicate these issues. It's meant to keep you on them, because what kind of business model, and this is what Casey Mean said, what kind of business model would it be if I said, here's a medication that you will only need to take for 3 months, and then once you're done with it, you never have to take it again? What kind of business model is that if you are a single person who needs one dose of one medication and then you never need it again? Think about that logically. That doesn't make any sense. You want clients, you want customers, you want people coming back for more. And that's where this is so alarming and so unfortunate, is no one is taking the time to say, generally, right? No one is taking the time to say, how are we getting to the root of these issues? How are we preventing these issues? Because guess what? If we prevent them, if we get to the root of them, if we never actually get them in the first place, then we are never going to be a customer. We're never going to be someone who needs that 1 dose, 3 dose, 10 dose, lifelong dose of the medication that they're selling, of the treatment they're selling, the intervention they're selling. Okay? So I want to, like I've said, tread lightly on this because I know it's complex, it's multifaceted, but it makes sense. It makes sense. These entities, these businesses, these companies, they stop making money when we get healthy. So if the food industry is advertising and marketing ways for us as human beings to become healthier, how dare they, right? Because that's a direct cross to what the pharmaceutical industry is looking for and what it is that they are hoping for, which is sick Americans. Now, one thing that I will say is our healthcare system is wonderful at acute care, at emergency care, right? You need emergency surgery, they are going to do it, and they're going to do it well, right? You have a broken arm, they're going to help you heal that broken arm and regain full functioning and so forth, right? There's a lot of ways that our healthcare system is exceptionally beneficial, and that's another point, and the same point that I want to continue to emphasize, that there's so much value to our healthcare system. It's the chronic health issues that they are not getting right, and we are expected to just live with, or it's just a part of getting older. And that is some bullshit. Okay? That's not right. That's not right. And it's not fair. And a lot of people are struggling because of it, because they're simply not getting the help that they need. They're not getting the guidance that will help them. They're not getting the support. They are simply getting here's a prescription, or come back in 6 months, or it's all in your head, or, whatever you want to, fill in the blank there. I'm sure you have a personal experience you might be able to draw from, right? I had a doctor one time basically tell me that it didn't matter what I ate or how I took care of myself. And needless to say, I will not be seeing that doctor ever again. And I also had a few doctors who would freely prescribe me antibiotics multiple times a year, and not once said anything to me about my gut health, my microbiome. And the thing is, I can't hold that against them because they simply do not know. And that is outrageous. I've used that word so many times this episode, but I have to. I need to find another adjective to use there. That's insane. Okay? The fact that I'm having a doctor prescribe antibiotics to me over and over again and never once calling into question, why are you getting sick so frequently? Why is this happening? Not once. And it's because they're not trained. And now I was left to pick up the pieces, because that was when I started dealing with recurrent sinus infections over and over again. The wind would blow and I'd get sick. I started dealing with cystic hormonal acne and skin allergies. I was super inflamed, right? All of these things. And I was getting sick so frequently and then returning to the doctor to get another antibiotic to address the sickness. And here I am thinking I have chronic sinus issues, right? When in reality, it was just what was going on in my microbiome that was causing such an issue. So let's recap for a sec. I want to once again reiterate the point that I do find that our healthcare system and pharmaceuticals and so forth have a role in the world of health. What I don't agree with, and if you know me at all, you know that I don't agree with the fact that we are perpetuating illness based on the statistics that I shared, how we spend more money each and every year on healthcare, and these numbers just continue to escalate, and we're not calling into question, why is this happening? And the common thread, especially within the last 20 years, is progressive development and incorporation of ultra-processed foods in our stores, in our cafeterias, in our hospitals. That's a whole nother ball game. I forget who it is. There's someone who's really, really passionate about discussing the nutrition that is being served in hospitals. I want to say it's Mark Hyman, and I wouldn't be surprised by that, but that in and of itself is just crazy that, in order to heal and get better for whatever it is that you're in the hospital for, you're being served food that's just not it, right? So definitely want to highlight that, and I want to be conscientious of my position in all this, as I've said throughout, to be, aware and open-minded for all parties involved here, right? But what it really boils down to, as I have really tried to emphasize, is the fact that these are all norms. And we are not aware of their impact because they are normal, right? Because this is just how we collectively operate as a society. The modern American lifestyle, not to mention the standard American diet, does not align with optimal health. The standard American diet, as we all know, ultra-processed foods, refined grains, refined oils, low-quality meat, right? There's a number of other distinguishing factors that, exemplify the standard American diet. The standard American diet and the modern American world does not align and is not conducive for optimal health. And so we are essentially putting an effort that is against what is normal. We're swimming upstream here. And we really have no other choice but to swim upstream if we want to heal, if we want to feel good. And it does make for some challenge, right? Not just in terms of access, but in terms of social norms, or, just trying to see through all the things that we're being fed about what's healthy, what's not healthy, what diet culture says, what our food industry is promoting. We're all so confused. We're so confused. And it is the food industry's benefit that we remain confused. Because if we're confused, then we are going to buy all of the latest diet products, right? If we're confused, we're never going to sustain a lifestyle change that's going to be most healthful for us. So that means we will always return to what is convenient, what is accessible, what is most easily incorporated, which we know it's grab and go. It's convenience foods. It's the things that, we see all the time in the grocery stores, the, microwavable dinners and the fast food it's it's beneficial, it's advantageous to the food industry and then subsequently the pharmaceutical industry for us to be confused, to be sick, to feel helpless, and just to abandon ship. So one of the biggest takeaways that I want you to remember and carry with you is this level of empowerment that I'm trying to encourage you with. What I'm really trying to illustrate here is, yes, all of these things are true. All the things I just mentioned are true. And also, we can choose differently. But that's not going to come as easily as one would hope. And that's the reality. That is the reality of the circumstances and this is really what I've learned over the course of, I would say, probably the last, how old am I? I'm 29. I would say probably 6 years has really kind of been the journey that I've fully developed and kind of come to terms with this concept, right? Is the fact that we have to acknowledge the norms. Like I said, awareness is the key to transformation. So we can look at this is what is normal and I am choosing otherwise. So this takes some time. Like I said before, it really is a mindset shift. And what I would have liked to also embed in there is it's culture shock. I just had this conversation with a client. There was an episode of a podcast and I really, pushed it out to my social media. I pushed it out to my clients and we had a pretty, lengthy discussion around this. And I said to her, this is going to be culture shock for so many, even to the point of, I don't believe this. This is too extreme. I'm not going to subscribe to it. And the issue with this, and the reason people resist, okay, and I'll say this because you might feel resistance from this episode, right? The reason we resist is because it requires us to think in a way that we have not thought before, or it requires us to see our reality as something different than what we want it to be. And that is uncomfortable. That is a level of culture shock, of course, right? We don't want to accept, that we've been lied to, right? We don't want to accept that what we've known is maybe not what's best for us. We don't want to accept that, wait a second, I have to do something about my health. It's me, it's my responsibility. And I think that is one of the hardest for us to overcome is the acknowledgement of, I have responsibility in this. This is not something that's happening to me, right? I have responsibility to take care of myself. And we just don't want to do that as Americans, right? Like, we do not want to have to take responsibility for something like this. But that is really the first step in taking responsibility and making a change is, I don't like the way I'm feeling. I don't like that I'm dealing with, 3 diagnoses. I don't like that I'm overweight. I don't like that I have anxiety going to the doctor for fear of what they're going to tell me. I don't like any of this. I don't like the quality of life that I'm leading. And then as a result of that, deciding it is up to me to make a change. It is up to me to make a change. No one's going to come in here and say that there's no pill that's going to make this better. There's no magic wand that's going to completely, transform my reality. It requires daily, consistent investment. And I think that is really tough for people to wrap their head around. So I think this episode, yes, there's a lot of, kind of conspiracy energy to it. And I agree with that. I think the way that the interview the way the interview unfolds, I sense a lot of that, just because of how passionate these individuals are about this topic. But at the same time, you really have to listen in and be willing to say, okay, I'm about to listen to something that might completely shatter my view of reality or might hit me someplace that hurts a little bit, right? Might rub me the wrong way and maybe for the better, right? Maybe for the better. That's really, important is that you're recognizing this is uncomfortable for me to listen to, and, discomfort breeds change. I love that. I think that is such a powerful statement, right? That discomfort breeds change. So you can feel uncomfortable, and you might, if this is all new to you. And you can use that discomfort to decide, okay, what am I going to do with this now? You can continue to live your life the way you are, and that is fine. And I also want to acknowledge, I had said before, is your 9 to 5 causing you to sit all day, right? Or are you working the night shift, which is affecting your quality of sleep? Like, there's a lot of things, and financial consideration is a whole other topic too that I want to very much acknowledge, okay? I respect that there are factors outside of our control, and I can't expect anyone to just quit their jobs or, suddenly have all this money to spend on more healthful options and so forth. But I think those factors are reasons for us to then just decide, well, why bother? I'm just not gonna bother. It won't work for me. But number one, there are a lot of small ways that you can still invest in your health that, number one, don't cost a lot of money. I talk about this all the time because I always want health to feel accessible. And also, you can work around the lifestyle factors that you feel might be inhibitory towards your health, like sitting at a desk from 9 to 5 or, working the night shift or whatever the case is, right? Those are just the two that come to mind. And you really have to look at your schedule, your circumstances, and decide, okay, these are my circumstances. Can I make a change, right? Can I choose to stop having my, Frappuccino every single morning? Yes, absolutely. And that's something that you're not only going to save money on, because Starbucks is so expensive, okay? When did this happen? I don't know, but Starbucks is too expensive. And I, know I have control around that. Do I have control of quitting my job? Probably not. Okay. Maybe you do, maybe you don't. I don't know. But I can make choices where I can, where it's feasible, where it's plausible. And then from there, I can, decide, okay, what are the things that are in my control? And then how am I going to continue to work around the things that are not in my control? That's where you will be most successful. And ultimately, that's where your new routine or your new lifestyle will be most productive for you, because you're cognizant and you're respectful of the fact that these are my circumstances. And if I'm trying to make it work for me, I have to be aware of the fact that these are my circumstances and this is what's going to work best for me. So that is what I would encourage you to do with, regard to making a change for yourself, your specific schedule, regardless of what your schedule looks like, because everyone has different schedules and everyone has different responsibilities and circumstances and limitations and so forth, but there's still so many ways to make it work if you invest in understanding, how can I make this work for me? So I know that this episode has just been kind of all over the place, right? But I really want to be sure I emphasize the fact that, and I know I've been saying that too, like, oh, I want to be sure I emphasize this, I emphasize that. I want to really, really encourage you to do your own research on the food industry, the pharmaceutical companies, and the relationship that's there. Be willing to understand more about the symbiotic relationship between the two, because it is so obvious when you really look underneath the surface what's going on here, right? Research being funded by these larger corporations, right? Dietetic programs being funded by larger corporations, continuing to endorse processed, ultra-processed foods, all of these non-nutritive food-like substances that are causing us so much harm. And yet we continue to normalize it as being okay, as being not harmful, as not being a direct contributor to all of our chronic illness. And yet then we just see another medication being released, right, or recommended. Now Ozempic is getting, headlined as being safe for individuals who are 12 and older. And, I heard that a Harvard doctor more recently came out and spoke on obesity. And she said that, obesity is not a choice. Obesity is not due to lifestyle. It is a genetic issue, and that's that, right? That's your fate. If you're genetically wired to become obese, that's just the way it works. And so think about how much this statement from a credentialed practitioner, how much of an influence this will have, and how now the food industry and pharmaceutical companies will run with this statement to now back the fact that obesity is something that is genetically wired in your makeup, and that nothing you do, nutrition, movement, none of that is even relevant. I don't know about you, but if I heard that, I would say, okay, well, to heck with trying. If this is how it is, this is how it is. And that's just not the case, because why is it that obesity, childhood obesity, adult obesity, obesity across the board continues to increase, continues to expand over decades, over time? I don't know the comparison, but let's look at obesity rates 100 years ago and look at obesity rates now. How does that make any sense? Genetically, how does that make any sense? How does the rise in chronic illness make any sense? How does the rise in mental illness make any sense if we're going to completely chalk this up to genetics? It doesn't make sense. You can't sit there and say that this makes any sense. So look at this closer. I get it, right? I am not a doctor. I'm not a scientist. I'm not a researcher. I am none of these things. I am just someone who feels passionate about health and wellness, and I do my own thing and I share on what I believe in. But how can we just sit back when it's all right out in front of us and not call into question why any of this is not also on a systemic level being questioned? It's not. And because there is an economic benefit, right, to continuing in this cycle, to keeping us sick. Everyone says it's not a healthcare system, it's a sick care system. And at what point do we have to say, this is what's normal and I'm choosing otherwise? This is what's normal and I'm choosing otherwise. I could not encourage you with something more, because it does take that level of awareness to look at everything and say, holy cow, this is what is normal, right? Like, let's take us through a work day, right? Or just like an average day. Snooze your alarm 3 or 4 times, right? You wake up, you grab a bagel, you have your coffee, you're, eating it on the go, out the door, in traffic, getting all worked up, stress levels through the roof. You get to your 9 to 5, you sit in a cubicle with overhead lighting, artificial lighting, right? You're on a screen all day long. You're sitting all day long. Then you have maybe a minimal amount of time for lunch. Maybe you don't take lunch at all. But generally speaking, I feel like the general vibe of our work culture is very toxic, very hustle, very, you have to get as much as you can done. Even if you're not in an office, you're at home. Oftentimes our boundaries are pretty flexible or non-existent, right? But we spend most of the workday doing, whatever that might look like. But if we're sitting at a desk, most cases we're sitting and we're not getting up, we're not moving. And we are underneath artificial lighting all day. And then, in some cases we leave and the sun has already gone down. And then we get home, maybe we get takeout on the way home, or maybe we get drive-through on the way home, or maybe we don't have a plan at all. Get home and we sit on the couch and we scroll social media and we expose ourselves to blue light up until we go to bed. Maybe we have some ice cream or something to take the edge off, maybe like a glass of wine. So I probably could have gotten much more detailed with that, but just that, explanation of how our culture has really kind of disconnected us from practices that really nourish, that is what we need to be aware of, right? We have to go back to our core kind of behaviors, or those core components that really fuel us. And I'm talking like basic. I'm talking like real whole foods and sunlight and walking, movement, fresh air, deep breaths. These are the things that we've been wildly disconnected from. And we've now, deemed that as being, I don't know, like we've kind of just dismissed it. We don't have time for it, or that's silly, or I don't know. And it's just really hard for me to sit here and really, clearly dictate how I feel about this, because it's just so frustrating to me. And I too obviously was once in a position where, this was all very foreign to me, and I really didn't consider it too much. But now that I'm in the space that I'm in, it's just so obvious. And, I know that this episode was really meant to kind of explore the food industry and the pharmaceutical industry, and I think I have done that. But what I really want you to take away here is go back to the basics, right? It might require you to live against our culture, and it might require you to put in a little extra effort. But in order for us to feel good, that is what's necessary. Unfortunately, that is what's necessary. Like I said in the beginning of the episode, from that quote that Dr. Casey Means said, if you want to live the way that America says we should live, then you are putting yourself in a more susceptible space, a more vulnerable space of disease. And we see it. I don't think you can sit there and say you don't know at least one person in your life that has some sort of chronic illness, that has some sort of ailment. You yourself, maybe, right? But in order for a change to be made, we have to look at this from a bird's eye view, and we have to be willing to say, okay, this might be the way that culturally in 2024 we as Americans are living, but let's look at the proof and the evidence of how this is not serving us and how this is contributing to our suffering. And then what is it going to take for me now to choose otherwise? Now, there are many levels that this can look, right? Like, I don't want to say that you have to go to the extreme and isolate yourself and never watch the news and never eat fast food and, do all these crazy things and take all the supplements. Like, that is not necessary. That is not necessary. If you can remove ultra-processed food and just start being more active, that will change your life. Okay? That will change your life. Now, like I said, you can continue to grow and expand, and that's kind of what my journey has looked like, where I really needed to reinforce my nutrition first and foremost before I started, considering what kind of non-toxic products I was using or whatever the case is, right? Like, there's different levels and investments that can be made, but eventually it just becomes part of your lifestyle. And I want to remind that, because I think a lot of times it can feel like, oh my God, like this is so different, and I'm not used to this, or I don't know how to do this. But just like anything new, it takes time. And if you're committed to this for the long term, right, which is ultimately, I would argue, the goal for all of us, is to change our lifestyle for the better for the long term, then it is going to take time for you to get accustomed to it and acclimate to it. It's just different. It is just different. So keep that in mind. Just because something's different doesn't mean that you won't adjust, doesn't mean that it won't become easier, right? I would argue all of those things will happen. It will become easier for you. You just have to be willing to take the time to say, all right, I'm starting at step 1, and then I'm only going to take it to step 2. But I'm willing to make that investment for the sake of my health, for the sake of my loved ones, for the sake of maybe the children I want to have, or the children that I do have, for my grandchildren, right? Like, we're getting deep here. We're getting really deep. So, like I had said at the beginning, this episode was going to be all over, and now I have to really put in some thought as to, like, what am I going to title this, and, how am I going to deliver this? But what I really wanted to share were just like my authentic thoughts about how this is so culturally embedded in our country, and that it does take a certain level of awareness to decide that our health is more important than what has been deemed normal. And I also want to shed light on the fact that the pharmaceutical industry and the food industry, they do not have interest in our health. They do not have interest in our health. Okay? They don't. And that's unfortunate, and it's sad, and it's scary, but they do not. They are interested in keeping us sick for the sake of their profit. So we have to be willing to say then, I need to then choose better for myself. Like, we don't have to go out and protest. I mean, we can if we want to, right? We don't have to go out and speak on this. We certainly could, and I'm going to speak on my platforms, to try and, share my opinions on this, like obviously I'm doing right now. But what you can really do for the sake of your health today is to start to just bringing attention to what are the choices that I'm making, what are the foods that I'm eating, and then to also do your own research and understand, how deep this corruption goes, how deep this issue is. And the more that you can understand it, the more that you can take action around understanding it further, right? You have to really understand it and know what's going on in order for you to then make a choice. Okay, this is what's going on. These are the facts. Now, how do I proceed accordingly? Or you could just turn to, a blind eye, turn the other way, and not do anything about it. And that's fine too, right? Everyone's entitled to living their life. They want to live their life. I'm not here to tell you how to live your life. But I am here to empower you to take your health into your own hands, to take initiative. Because unfortunately, that is just not what's happening in our country, and we're suffering, and we're dying too early as a result of it. So I thank you for joining me for this episode. I think more of this will be on the agenda moving forward. I think this episode kind of took a different turn, and it wasn't necessarily what I had envisioned, but I'm kind of grateful for that because it did leave a lot of maybe the pointing fingers out of it. I mean, I don't know. Did it? I think it did. It was less like shame on them, shame on them. It was more like, what can we do? And then also this whole concept of like norms and like the cultural aspect that really is dissonant, really causes dissonance in relation to health. Like what I said middle of the episode, the way we live our lives, the modern American lifestyle, is not conducive to optimal health. It does not support optimal health. It does not put us in a position to be healthy. And that is a byproduct of just the way of our modern world being so technology driven, hustle culture, toxic productivity, the food industry, the pharmaceutical industry, the way our healthcare operates. It's a number of these things, right? And also, we can acknowledge this, we can exist within it, and we can choose otherwise. And we can choose what's best for us and our health. But we just have to be aware of it first. Okay? So like I said, I want this to be an open conversation. I want this to be an open door. This was really inspired because I think I mentioned this in the beginning. There was a Time article that was released last week where it basically featured a dietitian who was trying to justify that ultra-processed foods were healthy. And there was a massive uproar by social media and the audiences of this article about how outrageous it was. There I am again, saying outrageous. How many times do I say outrageous in this episode? Let's count. It was, this uproar of backlash that this article faced, that basically said, are you kidding? Like, you're promoting this? No surprise, right? There's been plenty of articles and, headlines that have been released trying to justify certain foods or whatever the case is, saying something's healthy. And, it takes a lot of your own due diligence to read between the lines and to see what's going on, right? Or to do your alternative research, because how many times do we read a headline and say, okay, well, it's in the news, so it must be true, right? Like, I think that's a naive way of thinking, because we all know the news is maybe a little bit skewed. But Time then decided to change the article from why ultra-processed foods aren't that bad for you to why one dietitian says that ultra-processed foods aren't that bad for you, something of that nature. And it was just interesting because it was so obvious that that change had taken place. It was like a couple hours and they changed the article. So they obviously saw like, oh, wait, maybe this isn't good. Maybe there's something not so good about this here, right? And it's just wild to me that this is what it's come to and how many people are going to read that article and that's going to justify and validate the choices that they're making, right? And that eating ultra processed foods is not a threat to your health, because it's spoken by a dietitian. It's endorsed by someone who's qualified. So that was really what inspired this episode. And then more recently, I was on TikTok and I shared a very small amount on raw milk, which for anyone who's wondering, like, I really don't have an opinion on it necessarily, but I had said, I wanted to find raw milk, but I live in New Jersey, so I have to buy it in Pennsylvania. And the internet came for me. Now, not on a degree that the internet can come for someone, because we've all seen that, but still, like, it was so fascinating. People are coming for me on my comments about raw milk, questioning my credential, questioning all of this and saying that it was harmful. And I clapped back and I said, listen, we have celebrities and athletes and individuals in levels of status that are constantly endorsing ultra processed foods, that are constantly representing pharmaceutical companies or promoting things. Think about how many fast food ads you see or breakfast cereals you see with individuals of status promoting them, right? So me saying, short blurb on raw milk is so problematic and harmful, yet these massive campaigns are out there that are promoting these foods as if it's, commonplace. Like, oh, have cereal for breakfast, or, go eat McDonald's or whatever it is. And what harm is that doing? What harm is that doing to us? You look at every other commercial and there's something about that, So really just start to put your detective glasses on. I think that this is something that, you'll start to notice it more and more as you become more attuned to it. And not to the point of obsession, not to the point of stress, right? Because that can easily come from this. And that's not the intention of this episode. The intention of this episode is just bring your attention to the reality of what's going on. And let it digest. Take some time. Do some reading. If you ever need resources, please reach out to me. I'm going to put some in the show notes. But at the end of the day, we have to do what we have to do for ourselves. And like I said, the modern American world, it has no interest in us being healthy. And so it takes personal investment in order to do that. So thank you, as always, for being here, coming back to the table, even though this is a harder episode to maybe digest. I hope it brought you value. I hope it shifted maybe your perspective. Maybe it was just food for thought. But either way, this is important to me. It's important that I share. I hesitated at first on even recording at all, but I realized, no, this is important. I feel very strongly about this. And even if I don't come across in a way that I feel like is the most concise, I think I was still able to give you kind of that raw, unedited, kind of analysis of what's happening. And then you can then choose to do with the information as you so choose. So thank you again. I hope you join us next week for another episode of Let's Eat. But in the meantime, be well.